Hi, Megan.
Hey, can you hear me?
I can hear you clear as a bell. Very good. So it's going to be 2 minutes for your opening, 2 minutes for answers, 2 minutes for closing, and we're going to do a coin toss. At the fifth word, I said coin toss, and I got called out. Coin toss. Alana, she's like, you said coin toss. All right. So we'll do a coin toss, and then coin toss, coin toss. And just to see who's gonna go first with the opening and the first question. So, and I think that's it. So if you want to mute yourself and turn your camera off, 5:50, we'll come right back on. Sound good?
Sounds fine.
Okay, see you in a bit. Okay. Okay, is everybody there? There's Robert. Hi, Hillary.
I'm here.
Hi, Megan.
Hi, everyone.
All right, so we're gonna do a little coin flip, and it's gonna be heads. Megan, you'll go opening statement first and first question. Tails, Robert, you'll do the opening statement and your first question. So, all right, here we go. All right, Tails. All right, Tails. So that's Robert. So you're gonna have your opening statement first, sir, and the first question. Okay. So, all right, we're gonna just give me a couple more minutes. I'm gonna put the slide back up. Okay. I'll be right back.
Zach, real quick, let me just show everyone, make sure you guys can all
Sure.
see this so that I'll do it in the right order. So we'll have 30 seconds, 1 minute, and then stop. You can both see that, okay?
Yep.
Thanks.
Okay, we'll be back in just a couple minutes. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the 2021 Meet the Candidates Night for the Ninth Ward of the Albany Common Council of the City of Albany. Welcome everyone on the Zoom meeting on Facebook and YouTube. Thank you for joining us tonight. This event is co-sponsored by the Council of Albany Neighborhood Associations and the Helderberg Neighborhood Association. My name is Zachary Simpson, Chairman of the Council of Albany Neighborhood Associations, also known as CANA. CANA is a citywide nonpartisan federation of neighborhood associations and community organizations that has evolved in all matters that affects the quality of life of its constituents. CANA's mission is what is good for Albany's neighborhoods is good for the vitality, well-being, and growth of the entire community. I am truly delighted to serve as the moderator for tonight's event. I would like to take this opportunity to now introduce the chair of the Helderberg Neighborhood Association and a good friend of mine, Ms. Hillary Papino. Hillary, would you like to make some opening remarks?
Thanks so much, Zach. On behalf of all of Helderberg, we are thrilled to be here and thrilled for tonight's event. Briefly, the Helderberg Neighborhood Association is a group of homeowners, renters, and businesses dedicated to making the Helderberg neighborhood safe and enjoyable. And I think we can all agree that just like a democracy, communities are stronger with engagement. So with that, I sincerely thank CANA for organizing this event. And I thank both Mr. Porter and Ms. Keegan for participating in this evening's forum. So thanks very much, Zach. We're so pleased to be here.
All right. Yeah. Thank you, Hillary. Thank you for helping tonight. So it is my pleasure to welcome tonight's candidates running for the Ninth Ward Common Council position, Ms. Meghan Keegan and Mr. Robert Barr Porter. It is important to note that there are two candidates running in the Democratic primary for the Ninth Ward, Ms. Keegan and Ms. Jolynn Gallagher. Ms. Gallagher did decline her invitation to participate in tonight's event. Mr. Porter, running as a Republican, does not have a primary opponent. Therefore, he will appear on the ballot in November in the general election. We will hear from Ms. Keegan and Mr. Porter in just a moment. I would like to take a few moments just to review tonight's program and the ground rules. Mr. Porter and Ms. Keegan will have the opportunity to make both opening and closing statements and respond to questions sent in advance. We will also take questions from the audience as well. In addition, it is important to note that all questions, both those sent in advance as well as questions asked here tonight, must be neutral in tone and not directed at a specific individual, but the office that the candidate is seeking. If it is determined that a question asked is in violation of this rule, I will politely ask the questioner to kindly rephrase to comply with the rules. All candidate statements and answers will be time limited. 2 minutes for opening statements, 2 minutes for answers, and 2 minutes for closing statements. Our timekeeper will be Hillary. She'll be in full view of the candidates and warn each candidate when the time is up, or I will. She will display the signage that says 1 minute left, 30 seconds, and then stop. So now we're going to begin. We did perform a coin flip beforehand, and Mr. Porter will go first with both the opening statement and take the first question. So Mr. Porter, whenever you're ready, go ahead, 2 minutes.
Hello, thank you all for attending this event tonight. And I look forward to answering your questions on the issues that are important to us here in Albany and in the Ninth Ward. My name is Robert Barr Porter. I live in Albany, New York. I served in the Marine Corps for 21 years and traveled across the world during that time. I returned to Albany after I retired to be with my father, who was suffering from Alzheimer's. The last election I was in was for the 109th Assembly District, and I got 30% of the vote. You're not going to see that in the news because unfortunately the media doesn't cover somebody unless they're in a certain party in Albany. So if you'd like to know more about my candidacy or what I have in outside of this debate, please feel free to contact me. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Porter. And Ms. Keegan, whenever you're ready, your opening statement, 2 minutes, please.
Sure. So my name is Meghan Keegan. I am running in the Democratic primary here in the Ninth Ward in the city of Albany. I have lived here in the city of Albany for about 20 years now. I moved here after graduating from college and really chose to make Albany my home as an adult. In 2011, I bought a vacant bank-owned property here on Fleetwood Avenue. So I've been here in the district for about a decade now. I am a social worker by trade. Through my work in social work, I have implemented major state and federal policy, done grant writing to find funding for programs and services on issues that are integral to our community. My last 10 years working in the field, I was in state government providing oversight to our mental hygiene system. And the last 7 years of my career with state government, I served as a civilian investigator in a statewide law enforcement team. I also was an elected leader in labor. I served as a council leader, steward, labor management chair, and health and safety chair for Public Employees Federation, AFL-CIO. I currently work for organized labor, and I certainly have some pretty extensive leadership experience. And I look forward to hopefully serving you all on the Common Council. I'll leave it at that, Hillary.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Ms. Keegan. All right, so the first question is going to go to Mr. Porter. Okay. So the first question tonight is, what are some of the methods you would use to ensure you are listening and advocating for all residents in the 9th Ward?
The way to make sure that you listen and advocate for all the residents is you go out, you talk to the residents, you meet with them. Today, I was out and I spoke to 3 or 4 different residents as I was on my way to the corner to get a drink. And you also then allow them to contact you through social media, through your phone number, through email, and even letters. And of course, if elected, there would be times where I would be at the Common Council office so that if somebody stopped by City Hall, they would be able to stop and talk to me there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Porter. Ms. Keegan, do you need me to repeat the question?
Methods used to ensure you're listening and advocating for the voters, correct?
Yeah, correct.
Okay. So this is a rather complicated job. You have to be really well informed about everything that's going on across city departments, with the IDA, with the zoning board, with all proposed development here in the city, and all proposed infrastructure projects. I would plan to continue to provide the same monthly updated information that Councilwoman Doche currently provides to the district. In addition, I would also be present and attending all neighborhood association meetings, and be readily available and accessible to voters. I will say throughout this campaign process, anyone who has reached out to me either by phone, email, or social media has gotten a response, I believe within less than 8 hours on whatever their question was. And I'll leave it at that.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Thank you very much. All right, so Ms. Keegan, the next question will come to you first from an Albany High student. What motivated you to run for Common Council?
So throughout the course of my young life and my professional life, I have always been in a helping capacity. I have always been active on social justice issues. I have served on a number of nonprofit boards and in various different capacities throughout the Albany community. I am one of those folks who also has been very committed to the Democratic Party. I've served on the committee for over a decade. I was the president of the Albany County Young Democrats as well. And I've helped many, many, many people get elected, not just here in the Capital District, but throughout the United States, with a very specific focus on ensuring that we increase representation of folks who traditionally have been left out of the decision-making process. and I have been asked to run on many occasions. In this particular cycle, Councilwoman Doche is retiring. It's an open seat, and I would really very much like the opportunity to continue to serve my community on the Common Council. And I'll leave it at that.
Okay, all right, Mr. Porter, 2 minutes.
Thank you. After returning from the Marines, I moved back to Albany to be with my family. And the first time I went into the ballot, I saw a candidate that was actually endorsed by every single party that was on the ballot at the time. And I didn't think that was quite right, that somebody could actually represent everybody so equally across the board when the parties are so different and diverse. And I was at a meeting with some fellow motorcyclists, and I was informed that the incumbent wasn't going to run again. And instead of wanting to lobby somebody to change rules for motorcyclists, I decided to run for office and represent the motorcyclists in the community and other people. And having served in the Marines, I've served the American public for 21 years, and I enjoyed it. And I'd like to continue representing everybody here in Albany. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Porter. All right, so let's ask a question now and go to Mr. Porter first, right? It has been repeatedly reported that Albany Police Department has a shortage of personnel. Some communities want more police officers. Others feel they are over-policed. How would you deal with the shortage of police officers and adding diversity to the police force? Mr. Porter, 2 minutes.
My job in the Marine Corps was law enforcement. I trained with city, state, and federal agencies. I trained Iraqis how to be police officers when I was in Iraq. And to make a police department diverse, you have to open it up to everybody. And part of that is making the police a part of the community. Right now, there's a divide between the community and the police. They feel that the police aren't there for them anymore. It's not like it used to be when I was a kid and I'd watch the Andy Griffith Show or Adam 12 and they were there to help you. That's changed. The previous police chief tried to get back to that, get into community policing, and I believe that was the right direction. And I think if we got back into that and got more police in the community, and people knew who their police officers were, it would encourage people to join the police force and make up that shortfall. Having a contract that they have now, of course, makes it easier to hire more people because they know what to expect because they have a contract. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Porter. Ms. Keegan?
Yeah, so it is true that our police program here in the city of Albany has really run on a staffing deficit for a very long time. That is of particular concern when you consider the role and the job and the rates of PTSD amongst officers and the lack of relief time to help build resiliency and capacity in that respect for our police officers. In terms of being able to bring on additional staffing, that is largely, if anybody knows really how the city budget works, staffing allocations are something that's largely determined by the mayor's office. And so I think the council needs to work very closely with city administration, whoever that ends up being in the general election, to really address staffing shortages within the department. In terms of diversifying hiring, which is an issue that the city has really looked at, not just in policing, but across all departments. They've engaged with the NAACP on this issue. What we've largely found, because city police is a civil service job, is that there are some significant barriers to accessing and meeting the requirements in our civil service system, particularly for Black and brown folks who are trying to enter the force. And that is something that we need to strategically look at and really actively work to assist folks in being able to achieve the exam scores that they would need to be able to enter the department.
Okay, thank you very much. And okay, this next question will go first to Ms. Keegan. To serve in the Common Council, how are you going to balance the heavy responsibilities of serving your constituents with other commitments such as your other employment and or family responsibilities?
So I'm very blessed in that I work for organized labor, and I'm also represented by organized labor. So I'm a proud member of USW Local 9265. And that job and my contract with my agency does allow me with greater flexibility than most folks would likely have. I think it's also important for voters to know that I am someone who has, throughout my professional career, always had a full-time commitment. In fact, if I'm elected, this will be probably the first time I'll actually receive a salary for any of that extra work that I do. You know, when I worked in state government, I balanced near full-time union responsibilities with near full-time management of New Leaders Council and our local chapter as chapter director and institute chair. So I don't really feel that the commitments of the council will dramatically change, you know, my work-life balance since, you know, I typically come home and put in another 8-hour day as it is.
Mr. Porter?
So balancing my job and being a councilman is simple. I have no job right now. I'm retired from the Marine Corps. The demands of being on the Common Council, there were days when I was in the Marine Corps as a drill instructor and I was working easily 15, 16-hour days, 13 weeks straight. When I was in Iraq, for my year in Iraq, there were no holidays, there were no weekends, there was no time off. If something happened and I was needed, I was required to respond immediately. So day or night, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, I'm available and I'm used to that kind of schedule. So it really isn't going to be that difficult, I think, should I be elected to the Common Council. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Porter. And then the next question will come to you first, sir. If elected to the Albany Common Council, what subcommittees, for example, General Services, Public Safety, Planning, Economic Development, would you like to be on, and what initiatives would you like to pursue on those subcommittees? 2 minutes.
Well, getting on a subcommittee as the only Republican, conservative, libertarian, I think might be a little bit difficult. But being who I am, I would like to get onto committees that would help my fellow veterans, that would help the disabled, that help the elderly. Those are all interests of mine because of my family, my background. And so should I get on the council and should I be allowed to be on those committees, those were interests that I would like to be on. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Keegan.
Yeah, I would just note for Mr. Porter that your interests are more in line with the types of services and committees that you would find on the county legislature and within county government. In terms of the city council, I've thought long and hard about what my priorities would be. I would like to serve on the finance committee. I think that committee is really pivotal to being able to fund many of the things that we're talking about doing across the board in all of our throughout city government. The second would be the Laws, Rules, Buildings and Codes Committee. We have significant issues here in the city of Albany with code enforcement, with issues around renters, and affordable housing, so on and so forth. And so I think it's really important to be able to be in a position to continue to tackle those issues. And I think the third committee that I would like to participate in would be the Department of General Services, or DGS committee. One of the big things that we're largely not talking about in this cycle, but is going to be an issue for the council in this sort of next 4-year span, is the closure of the landfill. And the DGS committee will be a huge, huge part of how we determine what's going to happen with our garbage when we no longer have a landfill to put it in.
Okay, all right. The next question actually came in. It's about zoning. How would you plan to make sure the USDO review of Unified Sustainability Development Ordinance and revisions protect our ward from developers that are overly dense and tall projects in our neighborhoods? And I believe this goes to Ms. Keegan first.
Yeah, well, I think one of the things that we really need to think about, because when you look at the pattern of those projects, they have been initially submitted in line with what the USDO has called for. And we as a community have come back to those developers and wanted off-street parking. And those developers have then returned with a plan that meets that demand and includes off-street parking, which increases the cost of projects by millions. And in order to recuperate those losses that are associated with off-street parking, they are adding additional stories. So I think we need to, as a community, kind of come together and really decide what our top priorities are with regards to the density of those buildings. I think there are some other alternatives that we could ask for that would mitigate the concerns around parking. Ultimately, that is going to be up to the IDA and the zoning board as to whether they're going to allow for those types of variances with those projects. I would certainly ensure that the community is well informed, that they have an opportunity to provide feedback, and that I work alongside the community as a strong advocate whenever projects like that are proposed for this district.
Hey, Mr. Porter, 2 minutes.
So I've gone to the Common Council for meetings recently on the Palladium project. And what really didn't go well was that the public was opposed to the height and a zoning variance, a waiver for them to build the apartments there. And it didn't seem like the Common Council listened to them. They listened to the people that were building the apartments. And so it doesn't matter what the zoning board says if the committees, if the Common Council is going to give them a waiver and let them build anyway. So we have to stand strong and enforce the regulations that are there to ensure that our communities stay the way they are and are walkable and manageable and open to everybody. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So here's a tougher question. How can Albany put a stop to the gun deaths plaguing capital city? Was a recent Times Union headline. How would you respond to that question? I believe Mr. Porter, you can go first.
I'm an advocate for the Second Amendment. I believe that the Constitution and the amendments allow individuals to own firearms if they desire to own a firearm, and making laws that penalize law-abiding citizens aren't going to stop the gun violence. We have to make sure that the laws that we have enforce the penalties on the criminals. If we don't go after the criminals, we're not going to stop the violence. And a buyback program doesn't get the guns out of the criminals' hands. It just gets out of the weapons out of the hands of people who don't want them anymore and don't know how to get rid of them any other way. So we need to enforce the laws that we have against the criminals and allow law-abiding citizens to protect themselves. It's been shown that if somebody can protect themselves under the Second Amendment, that gun violence decreases. The amazing thing was, in Iraq, every adult male was actually required by the government to have an AK-47 and 2 magazines for that weapon. And they don't even have a Second Amendment there. So there weren't any gun shootings other than the insurgents trying to kill, unfortunately, the people that were cooperating with the United States military and the coalition. So let people protect themselves and we'll reduce gun violence. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Porter. Ms. Keegan, 2 minutes.
I'm going to have to disagree with Mr. Porter on this issue. Although I will say that this is an issue that is sort of larger than the city of Albany. I mean, gun violence has increased in communities across the country, particularly since the start of the pandemic. It is not a situation that is unique to Albany. We certainly are facing some repercussions based upon decisions that were made at the state level, particularly with regards to the Department of Corrections and how they chose to release people to parole during the pandemic that really largely need to be addressed. The shutdown of parole services, the shutdown of drug testing and oversight for folks who are supposed to be under community supervision has exacerbated that issue. But furthermore, when we're talking about illegal guns here in the Albany community, it is well known and well researched that the majority of those weapons are coming in from states that have less restrictive gun policy. I was really pleased to see action that was taken recently by the state assembly and the state senate on this issue, allowing for gun manufacturers to be sued in response to gun violence in our communities, because I think that will start to bring around some change in how those gun manufacturers lobby around gun policy throughout the country. And I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Keegan. Next question will come to you first. What is your position on the use of tear gas and rubber bullets by the police on civilians? You have 2 minutes.
I am in support of local law C, which would ban the use of tear gas and rubber bullets here in the city. I do not think that a government should be engaging with its own citizens in a way that it's not allowed to engage with foreign combatants in other countries. And I will leave it at that.
Okay, Mr. Porter.
So my training in the military was with tear gas, with spray. I was also a non-lethal weapons instructor. So I was instructed on how to use rubber bullets and other less lethal means to control individuals. If we take away a means that's less lethal from stopping somebody from committing a crime, then we're reducing the means that the police have to stop a crime without killing somebody. And it would be worse if suddenly that wasn't available to our police and their only option then was lethal force. So we need to keep other means on the table for the police to be able to control situations and stop problems before they reach the lethal level. I've been tear gassed, I've been pepper sprayed, I've been tasered, and it's not enjoyable. It's not pleasant, but I'm still here. Whereas if that wasn't available, then people wouldn't be here. And it would be a horrible thing to lose people's lives over something minor. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Porter. Next question will come to you first. At a recent neighborhood association meeting, it was shared that the landfill for Albany is predicted to be full and closed by 2025, 2026. Additionally, plastic production continues to increase, but much of it is ending up in the landfill instead of being recycled. How would you prepare Albany to handle those issues?
I look at recycling and I'm appalled at how much waste we get every day. I try to get the paperless. I try to avoid getting the spam mails, but you just buy something, and just because one container is slightly different than another, there is no recycle value on it. They're both made out of aluminum. They both carry a drink, and one gives you a recycle value and one doesn't. And so the person throws that away, and that goes into our landfill. I saw a program where they're looking at changing plastics to make them all recyclable. I think that would be something that we should look into and support, and reduce the things that have all this junk in it that we don't need, that just fills up our landfills. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Ms. Keegan.
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, DGS is one of those committees that I'm very interested in being on, and the closure of the landfill, I think, is a critical issue here for the city of Albany, particularly given that we currently are funding DGS services in part by landfill revenue, although we've largely moved away from relying on that revenue. In terms of addressing plastics, I mean, that's an issue that for me is way above the city of Albany in terms of directing policy that would have significant impact. I think we certainly can do a lot of better education for folks in the city around single-use plastics and packaging to help reduce that waste. But I think to really see a turn on an issue like that, we're going to need action at the state level. We do have good news. There are a lot of alternatives now to single-use plastics that are biodegradable and function much like the packaging we currently have. I would love to see some direction at state level government or federal level government on that issue, because I think you'll see a huge change in the industry. In terms of promoting a plastic ban here in the city, I just don't think that we really have the ability to do that without being significantly harmful to local businesses. And I'll leave it at that.
Okay, all right, thanks, Ms. Keegan. All right, next question will come to you first. Do you support term limits for the office you are seeking? If yes, how many is appropriate? If not, please explain the reasons why.
I would not say that I'm opposed to term limits. I think if that is something that voters were significantly interested in, I would be open to working on such a policy. I think the downside to term limits is that there is something to be said for the institutional knowledge that can be built up over time. Do you have a pipeline of folks who are really going to be able to do the job and do the job well, 2 terms or 3 terms down the line? And I think that is something that we need to seriously consider here in the city of Albany. I know the council right now is in a position, due to folks retiring or choosing not to run for reelection, in which we've lost significant institutional knowledge, and the council that will be elected as of this year will not have anyone on it who served more than 2 terms. And I'll leave it at that.
Okay. Mr. Porter?
I believe that term limits are necessary. I don't think that individuals should be in office for decades. what the appropriate number of years somebody should serve depends on the level of government that they're in. I think that the Common Council, it's not unreasonable to have a person have 2 terms. That's 8 years. That's, for me, that would have been half my career in the Marine Corps. And you get a lot of knowledge in those 8 years, and you'd be still here and you'd be able to advise people on the issues that are going on. You're not just going to vanish from the scene. So term limits would be good. And another thing that we have to look at is, as our population decreases, do we still need as many council members as we have? The population, New York State has gone from the 3rd most populous state to the 4th most populous state, and we still have the same number of representatives. So that's another thing that we should look at, is reducing the number of representatives that we have. Thank you.
Okay, all right. Mr. Porter, this question comes to you first, sir. Capitol holiday lights in the park has been an issue lately in the news. Objections have been raised. Some want to see the event moved from Washington Park this year. Other residents in Albany are fully supportive of the event and want it to stay right where it is. What is your position on the matter, sir?
I participate in another program that helps children get toys locally. It's called the Toys for Tots. It's run by the Marine Corps Reserve. We don't have a reserve unit here, so it's incumbent on former Marines and other people to help us. And I think the issue is the traffic. This is always a problem in the city of Albany, is where the traffic is. How do we direct the traffic? And I don't think there's going to be another place that is going to be as advantageous as the park, but we have to look at how the traffic is directed and maybe reroute the traffic so it doesn't interfere with everybody and their daily commutes in the evening trying to get out of Albany. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Keegan.
I would have to say that I lived on the park, and I have lived through many seasons of lights in the park. I am not a fan of that event in its current location. As someone who lived in that area, to have a place where you normally utilize as a pedestrian access to get to certain areas of the city be completely cut off for a month, to have parking restrictions put in place so that you have to find alternative means that are much farther from your home to be able to park. And then the traffic around that particular area, particularly given what we saw in this past season with folks driving very dangerously around a corridor that's heavily used by pedestrian traffic. I don't think that event is appropriate for the current space that it's in. Having that said, I do think that PAL does provide some necessary services to youth here in the city. And it's important that we work with that organization to find an alternate venue, because I am fully aware that event does bring in the bulk of its funding. And that funding is critical to certain young people here in the city who need their services. And I'll leave it at that.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Ms. Keegan. Let's see. I think the next question comes to you first, right? I think so. Yeah. All right. Oops. Just lost my spot. I'm sorry. Oh, so here's a question from a Green Tech High student. With all the violence going on, what initiatives are being placed around summer parks to keep the parks safe? As a teenager, I want to go to the park and play basketball and hang out, but I'm scared. My parents are scared to let me go.
Yeah, so we've had a pretty significant issue here, particularly around the basketball courts in Woodlawn Park. I have been knocking doors since February, and I've certainly talked with folks who live in and around and near that park. We had a number of armed robberies that took place, and I was not pleased with the response from APD with regards to those issues. I know that Councilwoman Doche did work on getting the lights turned off to the basketball courts around 10 p.m. to hopefully reduce the number of folks who are hanging out there. And subsequent to that, folks have started parking their cars and shining their lights onto the basketball courts and continuing to use those courts all night long. I think one of the things that we need are regular patrols through that area in order to mitigate that behavior. I think it would also be appropriate for us to set up cameras. One of the other things that is very noticeable around our basketball courts in Woodlawn Park is the fencing. That fencing is falling apart. There's really largely no way to sort of close the park after hours. And so I think that there are some basic things that the city can do to improve the use of that space.
Mr. Porter?
So when I first moved to the Pine Hills neighborhood area, I became a member of the Neighborhood Watch. And we would go around and we'd inform people of certain situations that were dangerous in the neighborhood. Usually when the new students would come in, they wouldn't secure their cars, or they'd leave valuables visible in their cars, and people would break into their cars and steal things. So that ended, unfortunately, when an app came out called See, Click, Fix. But it doesn't have that personal interaction. It doesn't have that support for the police and the city of Albany with your presence there. Security cameras only report what happened. And if there's nobody there, then it gets recorded and they try and find somebody later on. Whereas if you have somebody out there supporting the police, a neighborhood watch type situation, they can talk to people and they can ask them, politely to stop playing basketball. If they see something that looks suspicious, that may not be where the cameras are, they can report it to the police and keep an eye on it until the police get there. So I think a neighborhood watch should be reinstated, and it would help reduce that and make people safer. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Porter. Next question, I believe, comes to you first, sir. What is your position on the Common Council's proposal to form a public safety commission? If you support this action, what would you do as a Common Council member to implement it in a timely manner?
So, like I said, I was with the Neighborhood Watch when I first moved here. Another thing that I did was the Albany Police Department has a civilian police academy where you go in and you learn what the Albany Police Department does and how they do things. And you get to meet people from the department, and it gives you a better idea of what they're doing. So having a safety committee, I think, would be a plus. It would add to that so people would know what's going on in the police department, and we'd have an input on how they're doing things and ensure that they're doing things the way we want them to do it. One of the things I heard previously about the tear gas was that it was indiscriminately used down in the South End and it went into people's houses. That's terrible. I think that the option there, if it was a large crowd and you don't want it to go into somebody's house, is to use some other form of less lethal control. And that would be individual pepper spray. You'd select a person and you'd identify them, and that would be the only person that would receive that less lethal crowd control device, as opposed to a tear gas bomb that just goes out and blows indiscriminately around. So oversight is good for the police, and I'll do it as soon as I got elected. Thank you.
Okay. Ms. Keegan?
I would support the Public Safety Commission bill that's currently been proposed. I think one of my concerns with that piece of legislation is really the sustainability of the legislation and who ultimately winds up being appointed, particularly in our minority majority wards. I think it's crucially important to kind of look at organizations like the SNUG program and how they're able to engage with the community in a way that other folks have not, because of the credibility that they have within those communities. And so I think while the legislation is a wonderful idea, and I look forward to hopefully seeing it implemented here in the city of Albany, I do think that we need to, really look at the data and measurable outcomes when it comes to that endeavor to really ensure that it's working as intended.
Okay, and the next question will come to Ms. Keegan first. Over the last year, policing and police reform have been prevalent topics both locally at the state level and nationally. Please comment on the work of the Albany Police Reform and Reinvention Collaborative.
So I'd like to kind of start by giving a big shout out to Chief City Auditor Dorcia Pleers and the work that she did in terms of providing really a baseline for the community to be able to understand exactly what's happening within the police department, what policies we have in place, what policies we're lacking, and whether or not those policies are actually being followed. I do support the police reinvention collaboration and the adoption of the recommendations that they have made. I think one of the pieces that I am not necessarily opposed to, but I am critical of, is the concept behind the change to how discipline is imposed. My background in organized labor, having dealt with discipline issues involving unionized staff, that is a much more complicated process than the average and ordinary citizen largely understands. And so if we are going to change how discipline is issued to officers, I would really want to ensure that whoever's taking over that process has a really good understanding of what it's going to take to actually enforce that discipline.
Hey, Mr. Porter.
So one of the big police reforms that everybody sees in the news is defunding the police. I'm not a fan of that idea. I think the police need their funding. I think they need their training. They need their manpower so that they can perform their jobs. We've already addressed the fact that the police are short-staffed. Discipline of the police is difficult when the police have that thin blue line, and they don't let their superiors know when somebody in their own force is doing something wrong. And so how do you discipline somebody if you don't know that they're doing something wrong? That's a big problem. And it stems from, I think, the police believing that it's us against them, and they don't feel like they're a part of the community. And so they close ranks around themselves to protect themselves from what they feel as an enemy that's just going to attack them, not knowing what their job is. So as we said, we need to understand what their job is and make sure that somebody who's in charge of that and the discipline and the reform knows what they're doing. And a good example was that police academy that I went through, so that you know what their job is and how to perform it. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Porter. All right, the next question is going to come to you first, sir. Many properties in Albany that were once family homes, single-family homes, are now rental properties that are not given the maintenance that they once had. Code violations are often obvious. What will you do to support Albany's building codes?
So I own a building, and I was trying to renovate it during COVID to make it handicap accessible for a fellow veteran. And now the city's going to come through and they're going to reassess my property, and I'm going to pay more taxes. Whereas the person who isn't maintaining the property, is violating the codes, isn't going to be held accountable and isn't going to pay their taxes. And they're going to be allowed to do that. So enforcement of the codes is very important. Getting the absentee landlords involved in the process is another issue that we have to address. And so enforce the code, get the absentee landlords enforced, and find a way to make it an incentive for them to start maintaining their property, because punishment isn't working and raising taxes on the people that are doing the right thing isn't working. So we need to come up with a different solution that will get them to comply with the codes. Thank you.
Okay, and Ms. Keegan, same question.
I would just like to note that while it may not apply to Mr. Porter's situation, the city does allow for the establishment of handicap accessible space on a property for a family member. That is not included in your tax assessment if you add that addition onto your space. However, in response to this question, I would say that I'm extremely excited to see the tenants' rights law that's been proposed here in the city of Albany, which does a couple of things, but one of them is to actually really address and provide buildings and codes, as well as DGS, with much more tools, so to speak, in order to enforce code and property maintenance here in the city. That law would actually allow them to step in and do repairs and cleanup, and turn around and bill property owners if they fail to respond to the city. I think my only concern with that is that we really need to keep an eye on the expenditures related to that. In theory, we should be able to recoup that money, but if we have to go to court and litigate that, what does that really look like from a budgeting perspective year to year?
Okay, thank you, Ms. Keegan. All right, next question comes to you first. Over the past 20 years, taxes have risen dramatically. What will you do to help seniors whose fixed incomes have not risen? Some seniors are house wealthy but cash poor. What will you do to protect seniors?
It's a great question. I think Albany has largely done a relatively decent job, in part because of the 2% tax cap that was put into place on keeping taxes flat. However, affordability, particularly for those who are on a fixed income, is critically important. And I think that goes back to really addressing the overall fiscal health of the city. And while some folks here are really opposed to development in the city, commercial development is a critical piece of the long-term fiscal health of the city. Commercial properties provide a higher rate of revenue per square foot than residential properties do. We have a $12 million structural deficit in our city budget, and we need to make good decisions around how we're going to manage the city's budget so that we can keep the line flat on taxes and ensure folks have the ability to afford to live here.
Okay, Mr. Porter.
So I'm retired. I'm on a fixed income. I understand how that affects people. The issue that I see on our taxes is that roughly 40% of the properties in the city of Albany pay all the taxes. A lot of the buildings, a lot of the structures, a lot of the property are either state, county, city run, or they're a nonprofit, they're a college, they're a hospital, they're a school, and so they don't pay taxes. But yet they get services from the city every day, and they're not having to pay their fair share. So we have to look at changing that. As long as we're in a deficit on who's paying taxes, we're never going to turn this around. It's always going to be upside down. So we need to look at that and change who's paying taxes in the city so that we can reverse that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Porter. Next question comes to you first. Do you think the city of Albany public education system needs to be changed? If so, do you see a role for the Common Council?
education is a very important part of every city. If a person doesn't feel that the education they're getting is worthwhile, they're not going to go to school, they're not going to get a diploma, and it's going to even put them further behind. So we need to encourage people to get an education. We need to get away from the media that says that, you know, being a gangster is the way to go and to get out of the city. And so we need to improve our education and actually pay our teachers what they deserve, because right now so much of the money is going to things that aren't going towards education, and we hear of teachers having to pay for supplies out of their own pocket. So that needs to be turned around also. Thank you.
Ms. Keegan?
You know, Albany City Schools is, you know, one of the 2 school districts in the Capital Region where you can earn an international baccalaureate diploma. And it is one of the only public school districts in the Capital Region that routinely sends children to Ivy League schools. So the fact that Albany City Schools, there's a perception that they provide a bad education or that they are a bad school district, quite frankly, for me, is a perception that's based on race. And I think that's a real honest conversation that we need to have. Because I'm so tired of hearing nothing but horrible things about Albany City Schools when in fact they do a lot of really wonderful, great things. Having that said, you know, the city council and the mayor have no control over the school district. The school district operates as a completely separate governmental entity. I think what we can do on the council is really start to address some of the issues that do impact our schools. And one of those issues is affordable housing. We have a huge amount of young people who are rendered housing insecure. And this particularly impacts our elementary schools, with students having to transition back and forth through various elementary schools in the district. And that, you know, certainly puts the district at a disadvantage, particularly when it comes to student outcomes. So I think the council really needs to think about what we do to wrap around the school district to really ensure that our students are coming to school secure and prepared and ready to learn.
Okay, very good. Just got a few more questions, everybody. How we doing? Okay. All right, next question is going to come to Ms. Keegan. Albany is expected to receive over $80 million from the American Rescue Plan. How would you like to see that money spent in the 9th Ward?
So that money certainly comes with some really specific rules around what it can and cannot be spent on. The city is currently undergoing a survey to see community feedback as to what they want to see those funds used for. So I encourage anyone who's listening tonight to please go on to that survey and complete that survey so that the city can make those decisions based upon what the community wants. Having that said, the city does have the opportunity to sort of repair and restore some of its rainy day funds that went to COVID related issues. I think that's critically important. And I think it's also important that we really look at the impact to our nonprofits and the impact to our small businesses, and really ensure that we're adequately filling in those gaps that currently haven't really been met by the county or the state and how we allocate those funds.
Hey, Mr. Porter, same question.
So several years ago, I was actually in Colorado, and it was the anniversary of when they legalized recreational marijuana. And I saw a politician get on the news, and he straight up said that they had a $14 million surplus and they could spend more money. He didn't talk about what he was going to do for the people. He didn't talk about cutting taxes. He didn't talk about giving refunds on taxes, giving people tax breaks. And, you know, that's typical politics. So with all the stipulations and all the restrictions that are in place on what we can do with the money, it severely limits what we can do. In fact, I just saw that survey today, and after this, I was going to fill it out and see what some of the options were in that survey. So if we're hamstrung by the restrictions that they put on where we can spend the money, there's obviously going to be places that it's needed that we can't put the money into, and that's going to hurt people. So that's all I have. Thanks.
Do we have any questions from Hillary? Do you have any questions?
Yeah, Zach, just the one question I think is just a question about neighborhood priorities in the short and long run, specific to the ward.
So short, okay, so short and long run priorities for neighborhoods in your ward. Okay, and I think this comes to who? Ms. Keegan or Mr. Porter? I think I lost my spot. Okay, Mr. Porter, you sir.
I was going to say let Ms. Keegan go first, but
sorry, lost my spot.
No, it's fine. I think the short term is making sure that the people understand what it is we want. You know, like we just said, we're going to get this windfall of between $80 and $85 million, and what that can do for us. So that's a short term issue that we can look at, and we can address hopefully some of these problems. Once we see what those problems are that we can address, then hopefully we'll be able to look at some of the long-term problems. Like I said, one of them was actually in the code enforcement. You know, here we have a building that was allowed a waiver, and the people didn't want that waiver, but they were still allowed to build it. So we need to really look at how we enforce the regulations and the rules here in Albany. Thank you.
Okay, and Ms. Keegan.
So in terms of priorities here for the 9th Ward and things that we have largely not discussed yet this evening, I'll break it down to two. One is stormwater mitigation. We saw last week some really powerful storms that swept through the city. That is a significant issue for this district. One of the things that I would like to get done is to actually pass legislation that would require that the engineers in the water department and DGS actually have to get together and talk to each other before we do any infrastructure investments, to ensure that we at least look at the feasibility of green and gray infrastructure prior to doing any upgrades to our sidewalks or paving. The second thing that is, a significant concern for the district is really walkability, particularly along the New Scotland corridor. I would note that I did get an A rating from Walkable Albany, and if anybody's interested in finding out more, you can go to Walkable Albany's website. But I would like to see, particularly in the New Scotland corridor, project that was done by St. Peter's Hospital, and the assessment that was done and the implementation, that we do a road diet similar to what we did with Madison Avenue, to help ease traffic calming and improve pedestrian safety and cyclist safety along that corridor. And so I would say, specific to the 9th Ward, those would be two big priorities for me.
This is going to be the 20th and last question tonight. It's going to go to Ms. Keegan first. Small business is the lifeblood of our communities, and during the COVID-19 pandemic, they have been hit harder than ever. What will you do in policies to support small businesses?
That's a big one. It's lovely to see that our restaurant district along New Scotland Avenue largely survived, and that we actually had businesses successfully open during the pandemic, which I don't think was happening elsewhere in the country. I think we need to look at projects similar to the sidewalk project that was completed along New Scotland that allowed for the extension of outdoor dining and sidewalk cafes while still accommodating pedestrian traffic along that corridor. I mean, those are the kinds of projects I would love to see implemented across the city in order to support small businesses. And it was crucial to the pandemic, or during the pandemic, to actually close down parking and roadways to be able to extend businesses to be able to have outdoor dining options and outdoor space to run their businesses. So I think that we need to look at that from an infrastructure perspective and start to incorporate planning similar to that throughout the city.
Okay, thank you very much. Porter?
So one of the things that I've seen with the small businesses in the city of Albany, the state offers huge tax discounts, huge incentives to Amazon to come to the state. But at the local level, that business doesn't get any help. In fact, there's fees and permit costs for just about everything that they want to do. And the regulations sometimes conflict with each other and people don't understand what it is they're supposed to do to try and get things to happen. And, you know, I just saw that the subway at the mobile station on New Scotland Avenue is closed. And fortunately, the owner is going to put in a deli to take its place. Otherwise, you know, it would be like the bakery that's right behind it. It's been vacant for years. And we have other vacant buildings along that corridor that people just aren't willing to try and open a business because it's just so difficult to make it financially feasible. Over 50% of new businesses fail in the first 3 years. And I think finding a way to help them navigate the regulations would be one of the things that would help small businesses. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Porter. And now we're going to move on to our closing statements. And I just want to again thank Mr. Porter and Ms. Keegan for their participation in this really important event tonight. So Mr. Porter, why don't you go ahead with your closing statement, sir?
Thank you. It was a pleasure debating on this forum tonight. I really appreciate the time to talk to the voters and let them know who I am. As I said at the beginning, the chances of them seeing me in the newspaper or on the news are slim to none. So this is very important to me. And I wish Ms. Keegan all the luck that she can have in the elections on the 22nd. And I look forward to, if you do win that, to debating you again if you'd like. All the concerns that everybody's addressed are very important. They deserve solutions. They don't deserve platitudes. They don't deserve, you know, just somebody sitting here saying that that's what they're going to do. And so many people today, I see it everywhere. They say, I'm not a politician. And, you know, they're from the political party that's in power. And so re-electing them or electing them into office isn't really going to change anything. So we need somebody in that has a different point of view. I've traveled to over 20 different countries in the world. I've dealt with people from every race, ethnicity, culture, religion, sexual preference in my 20 years. And I think that experience would be a benefit to the Albany Common Council and the people of the 9th Ward. And I look forward to seeing them at the elections on 2 November. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Porter. Ms. Keegan, closing statements.
I too would like to thank you all for your time. I want to thank Cana and Helderberg Neighborhood Association for putting on this forum and allowing voters to, you know, have an opportunity to see how, you know, candidates think on their feet and respond to issues that matter to them. What I will say in closing is that I do believe for the Democrats here in this district, that I am certainly the candidate with the right experience to be able to do this job and do this job well. And the candidate with a proven track record of having been in an elected leadership role, who has been routinely responsive, who has listened to people, who has had experience having to negotiate at the table and get things done for my constituents that people don't necessarily want to do for them, who has a record of being able to build consensus around critical issues. And so I hope to be your choice in the upcoming June 22nd primary. Thank you so much, and have a great night.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Keegan. So in closing, I would like to convey some important voter information. To vote in a primary in New York State, you must be registered to vote, enrolled in a political party. Your party must be holding a primary. You will only be voting for those candidates running in your party. This year, the primary for those parties holding primary elections are being held in person on June 22nd. Early voting is taking place June 12th to the 20th. Please check with the Albany County Board of Elections for dates, times, and locations of early voting polling sites. They may be different from your usual voting location. Absentee ballots are available for those who are unable to go to the polls on election day. You must apply to the Board of Elections to receive an absentee ballot, which will be mailed to your address. You will then fill out the ballot and mail it back to the Albany County Board of Elections. Actually, the deadline is today for mail, email, or fax, and then June 21st, last day to apply for an absentee ballot in person. On behalf of the Council of Albany Neighborhood Associations and the Helderberg Neighborhood Association, I would like to again sincerely thank Mr. Porter and Ms. Keegan and everyone for participating in tonight's forum. As a reminder, Cana meets the first Wednesday of every month, except for July and August. We've been virtual since COVID-19, but we hope to be back at the Albany Public Library, Washington Ave branch, hopefully soon. So in closing, always remember everyone, elections matter, your vote matters, community matters, and democracy always matters. So thank you, everybody, and good night.